everybody. Hope you're doing marvelously well. I am very excited because we're going to be talking to my very good friend, Mr. Jerry Hammack, about one of my favorite albums of all time. It just had its 50th anniversary, and that is Let It Be by the Beatles. Jerry, how are you?
Doing great, Warren. Great to see you again.
I'm very excited because, as I said earlier, this is one of my favorite albums. To me, it exemplifies everything I love about the Beatles. Incredible songs, really great musicianship, some fantastic guitar playing on this record, and amazing, amazing songs. It's not characterized as being one of their best albums, but to me, it's my favorite Beatles album.
I agree with you completely on those points. I have a fond spot in my heart for Let It Be as well. I grew up with it, grew up singing the songs, and maybe it's one of the charms of the album is the fact that it's so easy to grasp in so many ways.
So before we get into a song-by-song breakdown, can you give us a little bit of a background to the making of this album? Because I know it went through some trials and tribulations, to say the least.
The project started as a concept where they were going to be getting back to basics, creating music that didn't have any overdubs. It was based on live performances, what the four band members could play together. That's what they wanted to track. So doing away with the artifice that had been part of their vocabulary in the studios for quite a long time. So the idea was they would do this film for TV, and it would show them in the rehearsal for this concert, followed by the concert. Now, they didn't have any location set up for this concert, and that was an ongoing debate throughout the time at Twickenham Studios where they were doing the rehearsals. And the band actually quickly cooled to the idea of doing a big concert in front of a lot of fans because they hadn't played for so long together. Now, some people might not know this, but Let It Be was actually recorded before Abbey Road. And the reason Abbey Road came out before Let It Be was after they had shot this film, they had so much footage they didn't know what to do with, so much audio they didn't know how to do with, that they realized they couldn't get it out for the planned time frame. And so in order to have an album to release in '69, they went to work on Abbey Road. A large focus of the film is the rehearsal work that was done at Twickenham, but these were rehearsal sessions only. The actual recording for the album all took place at the Unfinished Apple Studios on Savile Row. And unfinished because a friend of the Beatles, this character who went by the name of Magic Alex, was in charge of outfitting the studio. And he had zero experience in putting together a recording studio. He had promised the band a 72-track console with individual speaker for every track and instruments isolated by a sonic force field. And nothing at all worked. And nothing worked at all. The studio didn't have a patch bay. Cables were run through an open door from the studio into the unfinished control room. So to record the album, they had to get a loan from EMI. This was arranged by George Martin, of gear that included a Red 37 and a Red 51 console, a 3mm 23 8-track, Telefunken N10 2-track for mixes, Fairchild 660 limiters, EMI RS-124 compressors. So all these things were required to do the work. Because they were doing this for film, they had some unique microphones because they wanted kind of a low profile for film, nothing in the way of their faces a lot of the time. And the microphones they used were these AKG C30As, this kind of Coke bottle microphones. Very, very unique looking microphones. And again, primarily used for television. They also used AKG D19Cs for vocals, which was kind of a studio workhorse going back to the EMI days. Glyn Johns was the engineer in the session, and he favored, for almost everything, the use of a Neumann U67 microphone. And I'm talking about acoustic guitars, guitar cabinets, bass cabinets, which he also used DI on, drums. Now, the drum outfit was just a little more extensive. Also used AKG D12s and D20s, as well as the Sony C38A on the kick drum. And then Neumann KM56 on the oversnare. One of his other mic choices was the Neumann M49 that he liked to use on pianos. And then he had a range of STC ribbons, like the 4038, that would get used in all sorts of situations. Another interesting aspect to the album is there's no producer credit for it. Now, George Martin actually was the de facto producer for all of the recording sessions, and again, assisted by Glenn Johns as engineer. A lot of people think of Let It Be as a Phil Spector album, but Phil Spector's credit is on the album itself is reproduced for disc by Phil Spector. So he was the reproducer as opposed to the producer. Glenn Johns was charged early on with putting together some mixes when they had all this material they didn't know what to do with. He did produce 2 unfinished mixes of the work that was known as the Get Back mixes, Get Back album. And none of those made the cut, although they were fundamental to Spector's vision for a lot of the album. Spector took a lot of cues from Glenn Johns. That's what's happening on the kind of the studio side and the production side. Something very interesting to me about this whole project was, the brief was that we're going to get back to basics. It's going to be a really straightforward album. But despite of that kind of stated brief of no overdubs and all of that, only 3 of the album's 12 songs were actually unadulterated mixes of live performances. 2 of Us, Maggie May, and the one after 909. The balance of the songs then had some sort of studio trickery that we'll be talking about tonight, I'm sure.
So, Jerry, let's go song by song through the album. The first song is a beautiful song by Paul McCartney, 2 of Us. What can you tell us about the recording of that song?
So 2 of Us came from the so-called Apple Studios performances, and these were the pickup film that they did after the live rooftop concert on January 30th. The next day, January 31st, they went back into the studio to record songs that they couldn't do on the rooftop. So these would be songs with acoustic guitar, grand piano, or that kind of thing. This one featured Lennon on his Gibson J160E, McCartney on his 1967 Martin D28, Harrison on his 68 Fender Rosewood Telecaster prototype guitar, that very familiar sight to people that know something about Let It Be, and Starr on his 1967 Ludwig Clear Lacquer Maple Hollywood drum set. For amplification, throughout the Let It Be sessions, the kind of the go-to amp was the 100-watt 1968 Fender Twin Reverb, the Silverface amplifiers. An interesting thing about this song for me is one of 3 tracks on the album that didn't include bass. So, for a band that at one point in the mid-'60s was adamant about getting a lot of bass sound out of things, here's an album where 3 of the 12 tracks don't have any bass guitar in them at all. This one really adhered to that get back ethic. It was what you hear is what you get. It was the 4 band members, doing their thing, and it's really a beautiful, beautiful performance. It took 3 takes. They did total. The second take, which was known as take 11, was the best one of it. One other thing that if you see the film, you'll notice is back behind McCartney, you'll see his Rickenbacker bass guitar, his Rickenbacker 4001. And a lot of people will think of the Let It Be era, and they think of McCartney with his Hofner, and that the Hofner was the only bass that was being used. But the Rickenbacker was around. It was, and I personally believe that it was in play, that there are likely songs that it appeared on, though we can't identify which ones they were. Instruments weren't stage dressing for the Beatles. They had these instruments around to use, and so there's his Rickenbacker here in these sessions, and I think it was used. The release version was very straightforward. Only took Spector 2 mixes to get it right. So we start out right in keeping with that get back ethic. Can't beat that.
So next up is an absolute personal favorite song of mine. I don't know. I feel like I always say in my top 10 about 100 times, but there's something about that guitar riff to Dig a Pony, that that, and then of course the vocal is so good. And with Paul's harmony of 3rd above John on that first All I Want Is You, Everything has got to be just like you want it to. And he does that because
Yes.
so good. I think personally, I think it's some of Paul McCartney's best singing ever.
Yeah, I'm totally with you, Warren. When Lennon and McCartney sang together, there was just a magic to it. Their voices blended. There's a lot of their early songs where they would sing together in unison, and it sounded like they were double tracking. They were just so well, matched together. So that magic is certainly there in Dig a Pony. Now, this was the 5th song of the live rooftop performance from January 30th. And it's one of 3 songs from that rooftop performance that made it to the album. The one after 909 and I've Got a Feeling were the other 2. Lennon's on his Epiphone Casino. McCartney's on his Hofner 500/1 bass. Harrison's on the Rosewood Telecaster. Starr's on his Hollywood drum set that's ubiquitous throughout the set. Lennon Harrison on 100-watt Fender Twin reverb amplifiers. And McCartney, for his bass amplification, has a 50-watt 1968 Silverface Bassman and a VT Bassman 15 cabinet. Just played one time. They nail it. When it comes to mixing it down, it only took Spector a couple of times to get the mix right. RS2 was the final mix of this. However, there's some studio trickery going on. So now we've already broken away from the get back ethic. We're going to use the studio to make it the best song it can be. And for Spector, that meant removing a couple of vocal parts. At the top of the song, before you get into the first verse, McCartney and Harrison sing, all I want is, before Lennon goes into the I Dig a Pony first verse. Spector cut that. At the very end of the song, that's repeated again. Spector cut that. So he tightened up the track to get rid of kind of the looser, less finished aspects of the performance, but also made it flow a little bit better, honestly. When you discover through the film that those pieces were actually there and then realize that Spector edited them, it's a little bit of a surprise, but I think it's a good edit. Fantastic song. I'd put it in the upper range of my favorite Beatles songs as well.
So next up is Across the Universe. Now, the best of my recollection is this song had been around a few years before they recorded it for this album.
Your recollection is completely spot on. So, Warren, age has not caught up with you yet. And it's a good thing I've got my notes, because this one's going to take a little bit of doing here to explain to you. The work that the Beatles did on this song primarily was all done in February 1968, save for the orchestral work that happened in April of 1970, where Ringo played some drums on that orchestral session. Again, save for that, all of the work was done in February 1968, meaning this is a song that is contemporary of the White Album era, not of the Let It Be or Abbey Road era. It was a traditional, complicated Beatles recording. It was recorded to the Studer J37 4-track. So it started out with Lennon on acoustic guitar, his Martin D28, Harrison on tambura, Starr on drums, and 7 takes in. They had a backing track there. Again, way back in February of 1968. The next thing that occurred on this, as traditionally they did as they built up songs, was that Lennon double-tracked his vocals. As they were listening back to that, Lennon and McCartney both thought, we could use something kind of interesting here. Some high voices would be really great in this. So they recruited a couple of Beatles fans that were hanging out in front of the EMI studios, a couple of girls, and they were girls. I believe they're 16 years old or something like that. Lizzie Bravo and Gayleen Pease were recruited and brought into the studio to sing these high vocal parts. While I think Lennon assisted or played along a little bit with acoustic guitar to give them a little bit more confidence. But can you imagine as a Beatles fan? After that work was done, the tape's full. They did a tape reduction remix of the song. And during that, they changed the pitch of the song, almost a semitone. It was raised as they did the tape production. Then McCartney adds bass to the track on his Rickenbacker. Starr adds drums to the track. And in keeping with the times, they thought that would be really interesting if we did that backwards. That was an experiment that was replaced during the next session. mercifully for probably for everybody. Before the end of this particular session that they were on, they put together a sound effects reel with harp noises and humming, and they created a rough mix out of that, but that didn't hold either. That was an experiment that just didn't live. So we come into the next session now, and the backwards audio with bass and drums were removed, and they were replaced by Lennon playing his Epiphone Casino guitar, and also using this Vox V846 wah-wah pedal to do some guitar work on it. McCartney added the Steinway grand piano from EMI on the track. Harrison added some maracas, and backing vocals then were added at that point to the song. At that point now in '68, the song was shelved. Why it was shelved was it was in the running to be the B-side of the Lady Madonna single, but instead they chose to go with The Inner Light, Harrison's track, which is actually thought to have inspired Lennon to write Across the Universe. Inner Light's just a gorgeous, gorgeous Harrison song. If you're not familiar with it, I encourage you to check it out. So now let's jump all the way out to October of 1969. There were some sound effects now added to it, some bird sounds and whatnot, and a super speeded up version was put together of the song. So if you think of vari-speed, changing the pitch and raising the pitch, now they've raised the pitch even more. It's almost unrecognizable as Beatle voices unless you know it's the Beatles doing this. And it was a version that was created for a charity album, World Wildlife Fund charity album. The album was called, I believe, No One's Gonna Change Our World, or something to that effect. You guys can check me in the comments if I've missed that. Fast forward again now, and in January 1970, Glyn Johns gets his hands on the track, and he creates a stripped down version of it. He gets rid of the female vocals. He gets rid of the sound effects from it, and brings it back down to its only slightly adjusted vari-speed of a semitone above the original recording. So that becomes the model actually then, because remember, John's works was never, his mixes were never released. That becomes the basis of Spector's work on the song and the mix that he creates. So in April 1970, Spector takes that 4-track and he makes a tape reduction onto 8-track based off of Johns' version of it. And then in his infinite wisdom, he allocates 5 tracks to his orchestra and choir. Just crazy. And that's what builds this big, massive wash of ornament that came to the song. So it's a bit of a long-winded explanation, but it was a complicated song, again, spanning 1968 to 1970. So talk about breaking away from the Get Back ethic. Across the Universe spanned time and space.
Now, one of the things I love about Across the Universe is Lennon, changes the pre-choruses, I suppose we could call it, each time. Sometimes he resolves to an A7, other times he resolves to an E minor, and then other times he resolves to a G minor. And sometimes he does a 2/4 bar, a 3/4 bar, and I feel like one of them is a 5/4 bar. I'd have to go back and chart it all out, but it always felt like he did whatever was natural and felt right for the song.
Yeah, from that viewpoint, Lennon was a more sophisticated writer than McCartney in many ways. He was much more willing to play with time signatures and those sorts of things, follow the song where it needed to go. You mentioned, the sort of games he would play with key changes and those sorts of things, but he also played with meter just as effectively. Everybody's got something to hide except me and my monkey. A great example, but the examples are all over his catalog. While McCartney could nail forms, absolutely, he could nail genres. Think of everything he's doing from, the rock and roll of I Saw Her Standing There to She's Leaving Home to Honey Pie. Genre specific. McCartney can give it to you 7 days a week. But there's an originality to Lennon's approach to songwriting and a unique voice within Lennon's songwriting that, I think a lot of the times may give him a little bit of an edge. And don't take me for a McCartney hater, because I love McCartney too.
So next up is the first of 2 songs on the album, written and sung by Mr. George Harrison, I, Me, Mine.
I Me, Mine has a super interesting history when it comes to the Let It Be project. It was introduced at Twickenham during the rehearsals that went on there for a few weeks prior to the move to Apple Studios. There's a scene in the film where we see Harrison introducing it to McCartney and to Starr. And then almost immediately after, we hear a little bit fuller version of it, and we see John Lennon and Yoko Ono dancing around the soundstage to the song. The problem was they never recorded the track at Apple during their time there. So it ends up being the very last song the Beatles ever recorded. This is after Abbey Road. It's occurring in January, March, and April of 1970. And it's produced by George Martin, even though he doesn't get credit for it on the album. It's recorded like a traditional Beatles song of that era, save for the fact that John Lennon doesn't participate. He's not around for these sessions. It's just Harrison and McCartney and Starr to do the work. So we have a backing track of Harrison on a Gibson Super Jumbo J200, McCartney most likely on his Rickenbacker, 64 Rickenbacker bass, Starr on his drums. The Hollywood maple set that he's still playing. They get a good backing track by Take 16, and then they're on to overdubs. And they do a lot of overdubs on this track. Electric guitar and organ by Harrison and McCartney. They do an internal tape reduction to open up some space because they had recorded the drums on 2 tracks at this time, and so they condensed those to just down to 1. It wasn't necessary to have 2 tracks. They double track the backing vocals, and then they require an internal tape reduction, not a tape to tape, but a bounce down inside of the same 8-track tape, where they consolidated all the vocals. Then McCartney adds electric piano. Harrison adds some more vocals, double tracking the very end vocals of the song. Then more electric guitar, more acoustic guitar, and so you can see it's a full palette that they're building together the way they would build any traditional Beatles song, going back to, except for the most part, Let It Be, the Let It Be album songs. At this point, I Me, Mine's a really compact little track. It's only running 1 minute and 34 seconds. And we're in March of 1970, and now let's fast forward to April, and Spector gets his hands on it. And he's seeing this 1 minute, 34-second track, and he's like, that's not enough. We need to do something more with it. So he creates a tape reduction remix, and he opens up 2 tracks for his overdubs, which are going to be brass and drums by Ringo on 1 track, and his orchestra work on another track. Does that reduction, does those overdubs, and then creates this mix. Now, in the Spector tradition during this era, it seems like 1 mix is never enough. So the release version is the edit of a couple of remixes of the song, and he also repeated the chorus to extend the running time to 2 minutes and change, up from 1:34. So here's a song where he really played a role in shaping it in all sorts of ways, not just by adding the brass and orchestra to it, but also by reconfiguring the song a little bit, adding that extra chorus that song would probably sound a little bit thin without. But I love that. I love the fact that out of necessity, because we got a movie coming out that features it. We have to record it. Very last song that the Beatles ever recorded, I Me, Mine.
And I love that it's another one of Harrison's major, minor alternating songs, where he starts off the verses in minor and then goes to a major key for the choruses. I know he did that on While My Guitar Gently Weeps, of course, and Savoy Truffle. And it just is uplifting to go to that major key.
Harrison had really started to come into his own as a songwriter during this period, actually starting since 1968, probably, if you want to think about While My Guitar Gently Weeps, which is, to me, is absolutely a classic. But here, during the Let It Be era, we're hearing him start to work on the songs that end up on Abbey Road. that end up on All Things Must Pass. He's playing Isn't It a Pity and All Things Must Pass and Something, working these tracks out. They're all showing up. So, he still didn't get his due when it came to Let It Be. I mean, even though they could have put For You Blue into the live set, he didn't make the cut with that. But, certainly his game is right up there with Lennon and McCartney at this point.
So next is like a little 50-second kind of fade in and fade out piece. Dig It, which I think all of the members of the band have a songwriting on. So I presume it was a jam.
Yeah, it was a jam, all right. In fact, the original version of the song, this was recorded at Apple Studios, was over 13 minutes long. And one of the great features of the 13-minute version of it is a young 7-year-old Heather McCartney just caterwauling all over the track, giving Yoko Ono a run for her money in terms of obscure vocalizations. The track's cool because it features Lennon on that Hofner 5140 Hawaiian standard lap steel guitar, and he's doing vocals. McCartney's on his Hofner bass and vocals. Harrison's on the telly, Starr on drums, and Billy Preston joins them on a 69 Fender Rhodes 73 Suitcase 73 Sparkle Top electric piano. But yeah, they jammed along, and about 10 minutes in, they get to the section that we hear fade in of Like a Rolling Stone that Lennon starts to sing, and lasts for a few seconds, and then it's gone. Now, here again, Spector tricks us. At the very end of the track, we hear, that was Can You Dig It by Georgie Wood, and now we'd like to do Hark the Angels Come. And that was actually from a take of the song, because they did takes of Dig It. It was an extended jam, what they called Dig It. That was a take that was recorded 2 days prior that Spector crossfaded in cleverly to make us believe it was all one piece. The magic of audio.
All right, next up is the title song from the album, Let It Be. And as you were saying earlier, introduced by John Lennon as, now we'd like to do Hark the Angels Come, which is like the most Python thing I can imagine.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that Spector gives us Lennon making fun of McCartney, where, Let It Be becomes very pious very quickly, right? But we get that wonderful little lead-in of Hark the Angels Come. So Let It Be was recorded as part of those Apple Studio performances, the pickups to the rooftop concert that were recorded on January 31st. It features McCartney on that signature Blunther concert grand piano as a Model 1 grand piano, and John's like to mic that with a single Neumann M49 over the piano. Lennon's playing bass on this. He's using that Fender Bass 6, six-string bass that looks more like a Jaguar, but is actually a full bass guitar, not a baritone electric guitar. It's a bass. Harrison on his Rosewood Telecaster, and Starr on drums. Billy Preston played a Hammond L100 spinet organ on the track as well. Now, for amplification, Harrison's amplification this time is a little bit unique. He's using now a 68 Leslie 147 RV speaker cabinet powered by the Leslie 7875 preamplifier. Lennon bass rig via McCartney is that 50-watt 1968 Bassman Silverface with a VT Bassman 15 cabinet. They do that performance, I think it's tape 27A, they get all the way through the track. All is good and well in the world. Now come April, Harrison thinks he can do a little bit better on the track, and he wants to improve his solo. So he goes into the studio and puts a new solo on. What's interesting is we've got some B-roll footage of the Let It Be sessions where we see him working on that solo not on the Telecaster, but actually on Rocky, his psychedelic Stratocaster from, that's most familiar to people that are fans of Magical Mystery Tour. But, there he is in this B-roll footage working out the solo line for Let It Be. Did it make it to the track? I don't know, but I think it's wonderful. That could have been his guitar of choice. It just goes to show you sometimes you just can't know what went on, what the instrument choices were, because at this point, the Beatles had quite an arsenal to choose from. So he does improve the solo, and then on January 4th, 1970, McCartney comes in and replaces Lennon's bass part, and he and Harrison add some backing vocals to the track. This now is really following the traditional sort of Beatles song construction methodology. So they're not getting back at all. If they're getting back at all, it's to what they always do, crafting a great track. The best way they know how. We have 3 tape reduction remixes that happen, and then they're followed with a simultaneous superimposition of 2 trumpets, 2 trombones, and a tenor saxophone. Why I think it's important to point this out is this is in January of 1970. Spector gets his hands on the Let It Be sessions in April. So anyone who wants to assign a finger of shame to orchestrations being added to Let It Be can point squarely not at Spector but at George Martin, who right at this point adds not only these brass parts, but later in the same session adds a cello to Let It Be during the session. So there you go. It's not all on Phil Spector, and who knows? Maybe Spector was cueing off of Martin when he decided to build his massive orchestrations. That wasn't the end of the overdubs. They were completed with some tom-tom fills, some maracas, and then one more bit of solo work by Harrison on the track. Glenn Johns mixed the single release version of this. That's something people might not know. And Spector mixed a completely different album version of the song. And he even used a different guitar solo than Johns used in his mix. So both the solos still existed on the tape. Johns chose one, Spector chose another. Spector's version was further complicated by the fact that he had created 4 different remixes, and he used pieces of all 4 remixes in a composite that created the final stereo version that we hear on the album. He also added one little bit of a chorus, a section of the chorus, to the end of the song, extending the song from John's version by a few seconds. The other big difference in the 2 mixes, the mix for the single and the mix for the album, are the fact that John's really embraced all of the vocal work that was done. Some of that work including Linda McCartney singing on the track with the backing vocals. Spector absolutely diminished that down to its bare minimum. You hardly hear it at all. He instead chose to bring up the brass. That's what he thought was more important to Let It Be. Great track, very traditional Beatles track. Certainly nothing getting back about it. It was a completely modern track of the era.
Next up is a little 40-second track, Maggie May, which I read, I don't know if this is correct, was actually something that they did as a little pickup between takes of Two of Us.
Yeah, you're right. It was actually slotted between Two of Us and The Long and Winding Road. This was January 24th. They actually played the song 3 times during the work of that day at the studios. I don't know if they ever intended Maggie May to show up on the album, but why not? What I love about Maggie May is the fact that this is a song that dates back to 1957 and a version that was done by a group called the Vipers Skiffle Group that recorded on Parlophone Records. And guess who produced that record for Parlophone and for the Vipers? George Martin. So talk about getting back, talk about full circle. You have all that in this little ditty of Maggie May. Lennon and McCartney both on Martin D28 acoustics. Harrison on not quite sure what. Clearly the Telecaster was his favorite, but he also had Lucy there. He had Rocky there to play. I'm not going to rule out that might have been the case. Pretty sure it was the Telecaster. Star just on drums. Very straightforward. Not a lot to the song, and no fuss, no muss. Very much a get back tune very much in keeping with the spirit of the sessions.
Next up is another favorite of mine, a song that I've covered so many times with different bands I've worked with. I've even done a version of this song on the channel with a mic demo. I've Got a Feeling. Absolutely love this guitar riff. Love this song.
I've Got a Feeling was recorded twice during the live rooftop performances of January 30th. The first performance of it was the release version that we all know and love. Now, while you love the vocal on Dig a Pony that McCartney sings, this is the one that really gets me out of this session. His middle eight on I've Got a Feeling, that holding each other vocal just absolutely eats me up. You know, why were the Beatles so good? Why were they able to soar like this? It's because they rehearsed. I've Got a Feeling was rehearsed in whole or in part at least 100 times during these sessions. So, you know, think about that. You know, any of you guys that are out there in a band and you're getting ready to do a session. Think about if you played your songs, worked out the different parts of it 100 times before you recorded it, how much more it would be internalized. That's what the Beatles did so much better than anybody. And I really think it's one of the keys to why the Beatles sounded so great was these songs were ingrained in them. Really straightforward. McCartney on his bass and lead vocals, the Hofner bass and lead vocals. This is that, remember, rooftop performance. Lennon on the Epiphone, Harrison on the Rosewood Telecaster, starring drums. And they're joined by Billy Preston on that sparkle top Fender Rhodes 73 of 1969. The only under the hood sort of thing that's going on with this track is that the final version is an edit of 3 different Phil Spector mixes of the song. That's really about the only, unique thing about it. Not atypical of this era of work. Lots of engineers and producers of this era would do multiple mixes, and they'd like certain aspects of how the mix was performed across them, and they'd end up cutting them together to come up with a finished song. That's something that the Beatles engineer Ken Scott did a lot of, and continued to do throughout his recording career. So not unusual, but again, this is where it breaks from being just a mix of a song and becomes this sort of composite. Still one performance, but yet there's a little studio mastery going on that makes it that much better.
So this song, in the spirit of this idea of getting back to their roots, is a song that John Lennon said he wrote when he was 17, the one after 909. And apparently there is a version of a song recorded in 1963 for the Please Please Me sessions?
Yeah, the song dates back to, as far as its recorded versions, it dates back to the Please Please Me sessions in 1963. They did a version of it. It never got released. It was kind of put on the shelf. It came back to life through Anthology, Beatles Anthology, where we finally were exposed to it. And it's a pretty killer version of the song. Now, over the years, though not that many years, what are we talking about here? 6 years? Not that long in time. It had changed significantly in terms of its feel. And I really credit that to the inclusion of Billy Preston on the song. With Preston on keyboards, the song just all of a sudden swings in a really wonderful way. So again, this was part of the rooftop concert. McCartney on his Hofner bass, Lennon on the Casino, Harrison on the Telecaster, Starr on his Hollywood Maple set, and as I mentioned, Preston on the Sparkle Top Fender Rhodes. Now, it wasn't that they magically had some knowledge of this. Once again, lots of rehearsal going on in the background. This one, they did somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 rehearsal takes of it before they stepped onto the rooftop and performed it. But they nailed it. And the mix was nailed as well. It only took Spector 3 shots at it to get it right. RS3 was the final release version of it. Pretty easy going. Great track.
All right, next up is another one of those songs that I sort of famously think as being Phil Spectorized, Long and Winding Road.
Warren, specterized is a little bit of an understatement for what happened to the Long and Winding Road. This was recorded on January 31st as part of the Apple studio performances. Had McCartney on that beautiful Bluthner Concert Grand Model 1 piano, Lennon on the Fender bass, that bass 6 that looks like a Fender Jazz, but it's really a bass guitar. Harrison on his Telecaster, Starr on drums, Preston on the Fender Rhodes Sparkle Top 73. The song was a very straightforward performance there as they tracked it for the film, and was largely untouched until April 1970 when Phil Spector gets his hands on it. This was one, did he ever? What he brought into the studio in April 1970 was a 50-piece orchestra that included strings, brass, and a choir. And they all got used on The Long and Winding Road. To make room for it, he did a tape reduction remix, and that remix basically submerged any interesting work that Billy Preston had done on the track, and get in favor of his orchestrations. All you really hear in the version that Spector came out with was some piano, some vocal, and a massive orchestra and choir. So it got the treatment. It got the wall of sound. Let's not forget that this was a mix that was approved by the Beatles and therefore approved by McCartney. Where revision will come back and say that we can't believe that they let it out. The Beatles let it out. So at least at some point, whether it was of omission or commission, they liked it enough to allow their own record label, Apple, to put that out into the world. And frankly, I think it's kind of a beautiful song, and I'm not upset by it.
So next up is another George Harrison song, the second that he wrote and sung on the album. I love this song. I love the slide playing on it, and this, of course, is For You, Blue. I love that line when George goes, "Go, Johnny, go." It feels like a band having fun.
I'm totally with you, Warren. It does sound like they're having fun, and they have a lot of fun through a lot of the Let It Be session. I'm excited to see what Peter Jackson does with the remake of that footage, to see if there's the story in it that I hear when I listen to the Niagara reels, the 80 CDs worth of all of the rehearsal work they were doing. Because the majority of that, they're having a pretty good time, not only as they're learning the song, but reminiscing on music that they loved. And almost every day they were playing, they'd have a little break of a set of oldies that they'd play together. And you could tell there's this wonderful long-term relationship going on there, despite, obviously there's business issues, things that are boiled up in all of this. But I don't think it's quite as dour as the Michael Lindsay Hogg version that we got out of the Let It Be film. For You, Blue was recorded on January 21st, January 25th, I apologize. It was not a part of the rooftop concert, and it wasn't part of the Apple studio performances. It was filmed, of course, because they were filming everything. But in that way, it didn't make the cut. It ended up being the third track on the album, Maggie May and Two of Us being the other pair that didn't have any bass guitar at all. There you go. Harrison on the super jumbo guitar, the Gibson J200. Lennon playing that cool Hofner 5140 Hawaiian standard lap steel. McCartney on the grand piano, the Bluthner, and Starr on drums. McCartney got a really unique piano sound out of this. And the way he did it was super interesting. He took paper and wove the paper through the piano strings, through that upper register, and that gave it this kind of tinny sound in its ringing that I guess a lot like a tack piano, but not really like a tack piano. Just goes to show you, the Beatles were always looking for something interesting sounds, and that was one of the ways that song has that honky-tonk feel for sure, is that choice to mess up that beautiful grand piano with sliding some paper into the strings and getting it just right. 13 unnumbered takes of the track. The seventh of those ended up being the one that they ended up working on. Some of the things that we feel are alive about it, and I believe the "Go, Johnny, go" during the solo, those came later. They came actually in January of 1970 when Harrison replaced parts of his vocal in a session at Olympic Sound Studios that was supervised by Glyn Johns. So probably something a lot of people don't know is that vocal was fixed up. But if you go back to the original version and then go to the release version of it, you'll hear the differences in it. Release version was again an edit of a couple of Spector mixes. He wasn't satisfied with that front end acoustic work that Harrison does, and so he spent a lot of time. I think he did 12 what were called edit pieces that were mixes of that introductory acoustic guitar for the song. And his final mix was then a blend of those two mixes. RS1 was the core of the song, but it was fronted by RS5, which was the best of those edit pieces. So once again, studio magic to make a song that we, in listening to it, assume is a very, very alive beast.
Last but no means least on the album, of course, is Get Back, which was the original title for this whole project. And I do, however, want to roll into Don't Let Me Down, because Don't Let Me Down was the single to Get Back, and at one stage was considered possibly to be on this album. And Don't Let Me Down, I absolutely love that song. So let's start with Get Back.
Get Back is really interesting in relation to the Let It Be project. It was the de facto theme, getting back to where they once belonged, no studio trickery, nothing more than what the band could play as a band. And yet, here, even in this song, there ends up being studio trickery. Here in this song, it's not the rooftop performance that we hear. It's actually a studio performance that was the result of 31 takes to get it just right. It had two different guitar solos on it. One solo was used for the single. Another solo was used for the album. The lineup was straightforward, as as the rest of the more live performances were, of McCartney on his Hofner and Lennon on the Casino and Harrison on the Telecaster and Starr on his drums, joined by Billy Preston on that cool sparkle top Fender Rhodes 73. But again, 31 takes over 3 different recording sessions to get the right track out of this. It wasn't just a performance. It was selected and curated just the way that they had done the majority of their recordings. Now, when it came to the single release version, that was comprised of 2 different studio performances, while the album release version was created from the majority of that performance on the 27th, teamed with just the very coda of the Apple Rooftop performances, the Apple Rooftop concert, where Lennon gives us that aside that I'd like to say thank you on behalf of the group and ourselves. We'll hope we pass the audition. Spector uses just that little bit of those words of Lennon, and we hear the audience laughing to make us believe that this is this is live. This is in the studio. This is the Beatles live. They're not trying to perfect this. This is just what happened, and it's the farthest thing from what the song really is. Now, this was released, Warren's mentioning, in April of 1969 in anticipation of the film, but the work on the film and all of the audio they had recorded was such a mess that there was no way they were going to have this ready. This is what triggered getting into the Abbey Road sessions. They got this single out and they realized there's no way we can deliver this film and this album for 1969. We got to do something else. They had already started work in February on I Want You, She's So Heavy, and now in April they get to work in earnest on the Abbey Road project. But again, Get Back is just a wonderful curiosity, and actually, when you know the truth of it, it speaks to the truth of this project. They did the best they could to hold on to that ethic, but ultimately they were just trying to make cool music. And that's what we want out of any band, and the Beatles, I think, probably knew that inherently.
I always thought it was live. I always thought that was one of the live takes. So there you go. You shattered my illusions.
That's my job.
So let's talk about the song that didn't make it, just because, as I say, it's a personal favorite. Don't Let Me Down.
Don't Let Me Down doesn't make the album, and it's a drag because it's a sensational song. I mean, what do we cut from the album to have it fit? Maggie May, Dig It, still probably isn't room for it. Maybe it's a running time thing. Maybe it was because they had already released it as a single, and the Beatles were all about giving value for the money to their fans. So that could have very well been the logic, is they've already paid for this. We're not going to make them pay for it again. Relegated to a B-side, such a fantastic song. It's a bit of a drag. This was one of the songs that was performed on the rooftop. It was the second song of the concert, one take of Don't Let Me Down. So how's that for you? However, it wasn't just one take. After that concert, at some point prior to April 4th, 1969, Lennon and McCartney both went into the studio and they improved on their vocal performances. There's a hint of that in the movie. You can hear what sounds like they've doubled up a little bit, but certainly on the recording itself, compared to the film, you hear that the vocals are tighter, a little bit sharper. Another difference is on the original version, Harrison is singing backing vocals, and when it came to the release version for the single, Harrison's backing vocals had been eliminated. Beyond that, no fuss, no muss. It wasn't a complicated song. There weren't any edits. The big change in it was the fact that they fixed those vocals. They patched them up so they were just a little bit better, a little bit more precise. But a wonderful track. A little sad it didn't make it to the album. It did make it to the film, and we did get to hear it as the B-side. So I guess we'll take what we can get sometimes with the Beatles.
Jerry, thank you ever so much. Thank you for taking us through Let It Be, an absolutely incredible album. I don't think we've talked enough about it this year, 50 years on, and what a powerful record it still is.
Yeah, I think so too, and I've enjoyed sharing what I know about it from the recording side, how the album came together. I hope everyone's learned a little bit of something they might not have known about it. It isn't what it appears on the surface, and that's kind of a cool thing that is a thread throughout the whole Beatles career. They're never quite what they appear. They were doing the sort of edits and play and cuts to songs all the way back in Please Please Me. We think of these songs in their early era of being so raw and so immediate, but they were doing everything they could to make a good album even back then, and it continued out here now through Let It Be.
Fantastic. Well, thanks ever so much. Please subscribe, hit the like button, leave any comments and questions below, and of course you can check out the link down there to Jerry's book. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jerry.